Chapter 13, Generation of Abraham. Begin all acts and thinking by using Al-Kalun the All. Tablet 11. Malachi Zodoq speaks to us on the first migration. 19 times 14 equals 266. Lo. When you go back, it seemed as if the descendants of Utnapishtim moved all around. There were two migrations, the first migration and the second, which are referred to as the old and the new migrations. I should say there's three, because there is one older than these, but it is not registered. The first migration is when Seth moved into what is called Egypt today, originally called Tamaray, meaning land of Ra. And the next migration was the so-called old and the new migration. The old migration was when Utnapishtim's sons moved out of Asia as being Asiatic and went into what is called Africa today. So they moved in there and settled in the land. One of the sons was called Mitzrayim, became Egypt, which is originally called Tamaray. The Hebrews call it Mitzrayim in their Torah. The Christians call it Egyptos in their Evangel. The Muslims call it Missa in their Quran. It was the land inhabited by the Nubians. Another son, who was called Cush, inhabited the land which became known as Ethiopia. The Hebrews called it Cush in their Torah, and the Christians call it Ethiops in their Evangel, and the Muslims falsely call it Habashi in their commentary of their Qurans, which is in actuality was a Yemenese tribe called Habasha. Another son, Ham, lived in the area that became known as Sudan, Aswan, and another son, Phut, lived in an area that became known as Libya, and then they mixed with the Tunis, called the Tunisia of today, and this is how that place was set up. The first settlers of Libya were the children of Phut and his wife Lib, which is where the name Libya derived from. These people occupied the land area of northern Africa, West Egypt. The other Libyan people migrated from Egypt through Ludim and Lehabim. Traces of Phut's descendants are also found across the continent of Africa from Somalia to Senegal. Ludim and Lehabim had occupied parts of Egypt and the southwestern part of Palestine as Hamitic people. The Ludim were a dark brown-skinned woolly-haired people. Constituted with the Ludim tribe are their brothers Lehabim. Lehabim means flaming. The Lehabims are considered one of Libya's most prominent tribes and is grouped with the Libyans who descended from Phut. They were close relatives of the ancient Egyptians and Cushites. The Lubim are another tribe of Libyan peoples who are descendants of Phut and his confident wife Lib. They were an ancient Nubian people and they lived in North Africa, west of Egypt, in what is called Cyrenaica in Libya today. The Phoenicians and Greeks eventually drove some of the Lubim into the desert and the mountains, where they remained and are now known as the Desert Berbers and the Kabils, which are the Algerian Berbers. The Libyans were a warlike people who continuously tried to invade Tamaray. These people, along with the sea peoples such as the Philistines, joined forces to fight against the Pharaoh Meneptah, son of Ramesses II, and years later with the Pharaoh Ramesses III. These people are tribes who lived on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. These invaders, led by the Libyan commander Merier, lost the battle. Some soldiers fled, while others were captured as prisoners of war and then became slaves. From the Libyans who descended from Phut came the great ruler Shishak, son of Nemrat. He is also known as Pharaoh Sheshonq I. He served as a powerful military commander of Egypt over the mercenary forces in that city as allies and mercenaries of the Egyptians. The Libyans were paid in land grants, by which they settled over in Lower Egypt with their families. As the Libyans increased in their power in Lower Egypt, they became rivals of the religious men and the court. It was time that Shishak seized control over both Upper and Lower Egypt. This happened with minimum resistance. Shishak became the founder of the 22nd dynasty that ruled over Egypt, with his supportive wife Queen Koroma at his right hand. He sought to unite Egypt with the many faithful tribes of Libya and the other peoples who inhabited the northern Nile country into a closer relationship, and to revive a decaying and divided country. Only then would Libya and Egypt be identified as the Hamitic nation that they once were. The mighty and powerful Shishak reigned in that time with the great ruler Solomon. However, in the year 969 BC, after the death of the prophet Solomon, Shishak conquered Judah and Israel. Shishak was able to conquer these countries because Israel Jeroboam, son of Neat and ruler of the 10-tribe nation, were in constant strife with each other, and the land was filled with wickedness and transgression. Because of this weak spot, as well as the death of the powerful Solomon, Shishak was able to take these two countries unprepared for defense. The pharaoh Shishak captured, destroyed many cities and carried off treasures of the temple and palace. With his spoils of war, he was able to replenish his dynasty. Details of this campaign have been found on the walls of Amon's temple in Karnak. The Libyans contributed largely to Shishak's army. They also formed with the Kushite the bulk of Zerah's army. Zerah was the Kushite invader of Judah. As the Romans and Byzantines took over Libya, they intermixed with the original people as primal Libyans. Therefore, the Libyans you see today is the result of invasions, slavery and peaceful migrations. The mixture of Libyans with Greeks, Romans and Persians explain the features of Libyans today. The Libyans, such as Muammar Gaddafi and his fellow Libyans, do not look like how their ancestors look. Instead, their features lean more towards today's Sicilians, who are located in the southernmost part of Italy, and Cretians, who are inhabitants of a Greek island in the Mediterranean Sea. The Ludim and the Lehabim all contributed to what we know as Libya today. As descendants of Ham, they are all Hamitic people, brother of Shem's descendants who are Shemitic. Now, the second son of Mitzrayim was Anamim, meaning men of the rock, or those who carve great statues out of rock, such as Abu Simbel, an Egyptian pharaoh of the dynasty, and he was the builder of the pyramid. These are the Aswanese, and the third son of Lehabim, meaning those are the flames, called his son Tawni, and these became known as Tunisia. And the fourth son Naphtahim, which means those who live by the border, which was named after his son Gera, where the great pharaoh Abimelech did rule and met the powers of El-Elo. Known to him as Atum, first incarnation of the deities. However, by Abram's Tafel prayer, he was called Amun-Ra or Nu, called the ruler of the heavens, often replaced by Atun, the deity of the sun, light provider of life, known to Abram as Elion Elionel, given to him by Melchizedek, one of the Elohim, and he, Abram, did comply. And his fifth son Paphrakim moved to the south and became known as Nubia, where there are great pyramids. And the sixth son Caslahim, who set up the borders and fortified the land. They lived together with the seventh son, whose name was Cathrahim. The youngest brother was the crowned ruler over Philistine. They are the real Philistines. They moved to Bethel and Farah to take the land of Avim in the land of Canaan. Then the Somalians, Djiboutians, Kenyans, and all those are descendants from the same one Ham, because the tribes intermingled with the Asiatic black man of Hindu descent, resulting in 25% of their nation changing from 9 Ephah to vary from 8, 7 and 6 Ephah. They settled in this kingdom and did not worship Alat, they worshipped Hu, the creative force of will, an Egyptian deity. The second migration took place when the Israelites hired Gideon and his army to conquer the Ishmaelites branch of the Midianites from the sons of Keturah. They massacred them and wiped them out. It was said that Kedar shall take their tents, and they shall go themselves and all their curtains. They will disappear. We migrated, and as we migrated, spread to Senegal, Mali, Chad, and different places. The Midianites escaped the massacre of Gideon and the Israelites, settling in what is called Mali today, amongst the Dogons, the original Nubans, later to migrate westward by great ships, landing on the shores of what is called America today, from the word Amexem, and intermingled with the Hopi and Navajo, whose ancestors migrated from China in the 4th century to the shores of America under the great ruler Shushan of the Shang dynasty to become known as the Native Americans, then later into all the other tribes of the Western world, finding their roots strongly in the Oconee, Okmulgee, Yamakro, Catawba, Comanche, Arikara, Cherokee, Choctaw, Kiowa, Pequot, Mohawk, Creek, Cheyenne, Crow, Shinnecock, Mandan, Sioux, Blackfoot, Seminole, Shoshone, Navajo, Powhatans, Yamasee, Nez, Pierce, Zuni, Mohican, Manahawk, all living under the umbrella of the Yamasee. After that, in the year 1610, Ahmed, son of Abdullah and Amina, who was a Sudanese, died. His daughter Hadrat Fatima and their sons Hassan and Hussein migrated up to Egypt. They stayed in Egypt and started moving down, and they settled in Dongola and became known as the Hendendawa tribes, or simply the Faziwazi, because of their thick 9 Ephah bushy hair. That's how they came back into Africa. But there were already descendants there when he got into Sudan. Over in the western part of Sudan, there were already Midianites in Aswan and Nubia. You already encountered people who had the ancient beliefs in the ancient religion. It wasn't canonized and put into a form of modern-day Mohammedism, which means it wasn't adulterated with all the traditions and the customs that the Babylonians and Hindus had taught the false Muslims. There were no sun and moon letters as you have in the original languages, and there wasn't prostration in prayer like the Mohammedites have you praying. Now there was prostrations, however. You went from raising your hands like the ancient Egyptians and prostration like the Falashas. You didn't have all the positions in between and all of these traditions, such as women can't go to temple, you can't do this here, you must wear this on your head and so forth. You didn't have any of that. All of these customs you picked up while you lived in the Asiatic areas, and then you came back and set up Africa. Some of you lived there so long that you lost the original customs, but if you go to the bush people, you will find that they live a very strict life, and they all identify with the star formation of Sept, also known as Sothis and Sirius. And that's because the elders used to put up their arms in prayer, so the evil one had to reverse and teach you to look down in prayer, because he knew that when you prayed with your hands up, you were looking up towards the elders. When you were seen praying with your hands raised towards the sun, it was said that you worshipped the sun, but you didn't worship the sun, you adored the sun. The sun appeared to rise on the Nile, and its light would walk the water. Thus, the sun walked upon the water. It was the light of the world. The sun was the light of the world. There was healing in its rays. The sun was the healer, and vegetation grew. The sun provided food where there was none, and everything came to life for us, and all other people had to come into our original land Tamaray, which was called Kushi, when their land went bad, and the disappearance of the sun behind the horizon was symbolic of death, and when it appeared to rise, it was symbolic of the resurrection of the sun. As you can plainly see, many false religions were born from your original customs. None of them were sun worshippers, but rather a respect for the universe and the planet and its life, for it was the provider. The Hindus East Indians came across the Bering Strait and mixed in with the Native Americans that moved north called the Eskimos, who were Mongolians or Mongoloid. So you have these Hindu Indians mixing in with the Eskimos and breeding tribes like the Maya or Seminole of today. The Mayans disregarded the original Olmec traditions and kept on to their Chinese traditions of virgin, blood and children sacrifices to their gods, who were the reptilians of the Dogons called Dogir, meaning ugly water beings. Generations after this, the invasions of the Hittites and their spreading abroad, other groups of people having sprung forth due to their intermingling. Esau, the son of Yitzhak and Rebekah, and also the twin of Jacob, was a direct descendant of Abraham, willfully mixed his seed with the Hittite and Hivite women, thus bringing about the biblical tribe of the people known as the Edomites, who bear the curse of Mongoloidism. From this intermingling, you have various nations that bear the features of this curse. There are two classes of Edomites. There is the historic Edomites and the biblical Edomites. The term Edomite is the biblical name for the Mongoloids. The biblical Edomites came by way of Esau, the son of Isaac and Rebekah. Esau's seed was cursed with Mongoloidism because he mixed his seed with the Canaanites, and this was going against the commandment as found in Genesis 28:1 and 28:6, which was a commandment from the Most High. However, out of spite, Esau took Canaanite wives to get even with his father for giving his blessings to his brother Jacob instead of him. Genesis 27 verses 28 to 29. He mixed his seed with these Canaanite tribes, and a curse was placed on Esau through his genes. Esau and his family eventually went to stay in Mount Seir, Genesis 36:8. When they went to Mount Seir, there were already beings living in Mount Seir. These beings were the Shaggies, who are tall, who came from the Sirius star constellation, and the Duanis, who are short and hairy, who came from the Canis Major constellation. Both were called Horite. They eventually bred and mixed with the Teros, who were also of tall stature, who came to the surface and created a branch of the Mongoloid race. This is why there are some tall Orientals and some short Orientals. The mixture of the Teros and the Shaggies caused a defect of the 47th chromosome, producing what is commonly called Down syndrome. The Teros's chromosome structure is so much different from that of Earthlings that the mixture caused this disorder. The Eskimos are an off-bred from this mixture of Terror and Shaggies also. These Teros also mixed with the Duanis, and this caused a disease called hirsutism, where the body is fully covered with hair. This is very common amongst the Mongoloids today. In fact, in the teachings of the Hopi Native Americans, they also acknowledge the existence of the Shaggies or Bigfoot, whom they called Mansa. They believe that Mansa is the greatest spirit person who walks the surface of the earth. It is stated that he is the first, the last, the eternal. They believe that Bigfoot was here first, then we human beings were planted here. The Vietnamese also hold these same beliefs. They call the Shaggies Lay, which refers to the monkey man. Only they say that he is not a monkey and he is not a man. He is God and the most powerful human type manifestation on the surface of the earth. They also call him the monkey god in India, the father. It is believed that in 1992 AD, Bigfoot started talking to the people in Europe and America in intelligible words. Ordinarily he communicates by thoughts or with visions, dreams, or in body language, sometimes called Indian Sign Language. He is now coming down from the high mountains and appearing in broad daylight at the edge of villages. The Native Americans say that he is really giving everyone the opportunity to bear witness to the fact that he's here. And from the Native Americans' viewpoint, it's the beginning of the fulfillment of the prophecies that he would come back to re-establish justice in this land. The Edomites are thought to have come from the Caucasus because they resided and mixed with these Horites that were already living in Mount Seir. These Syrians were of a regressive gene. It is no coincidence that the Hebrew word for Seir is Sair and means hairy, rough, and the Shaggies were hairy beings. So put it out your mind that Esau is only the biblical Mongoloid or Edomite race. There were Mongoloids living way before Esau, and these Mongoloids were a mixture of Terosh and the Shaggies. Later, trying to right his wrong, Esau married an Ishmaelite named Mahaleth. She was also called Basemeth, the daughter of Ishmael and Sayyida Fatima. Esau's seed having intermingled with other tribes of Nubian descent as well, who have migrated to other parts of the world, brought about a new characteristic of people, having various hues in their complexion and slantness of their eyes, which came from a mixture with the noble Sinian, called the Teros, who live inside caverns in the planet Earth, some of which came to the surface and lived in Mount Seir, where they mixed with Esau's children, giving the Orientals a larger brain and a degree more of intelligence than most, being children of extraterrestrials from which the Teros originally came from beyond the stars. Their hair texture is different than Earthlings insofar as it's hollow. Their complexion ranged from various shades of brown to light to yellowish reds and dark, and their hair texture varied from straight to wavy to curly to a trait of hollow texture. Their eyes are only different insofar as they have a shorter top lid, a trait that the Teros also have, for the Teros have a 48th chromosome, and when improperly mixed on the planet Earth with the wrong seed, produces Down syndrome. The slant in their eyes is the same as that of the Havilavites tribe, from which Anath, mother of Nekeba, came, and they have shovel-shaped teeth, which can only be found in Orientals and the Native Americans today. These are your races such as Japanese, Koreans, Indonesians, Alaskans, Native Americans, Malaysians, and many other peoples of Mongolian stock, who are descendants through mixing of their seed with other Asian and Nubian or African tribes. As the Edomites migrated west into Africa, they mixed with the Midianites and Ishmaelite tribes that were defeated by the Gideonites, who had intermingled with the Israelites. The Norbans or Nubas walked or travelled westward from their own land in search of other lands and resources. They came to a place that was once called the Land of Frogs, and they called that place in their Kushite language Utla, which means to go somewhere for vacation. Utla became Atlan, making it dual, and it signified North America, and beneath that was South America, and Plato the Greek historian added Tis, and you get Atlantis, which was North America and South America prior to their separation, which occurred after continental drift took place. The Edomite tribes were separated by this drift, with some in north and some in the south. Centuries later, a man named Mansa Musa, ruler of West African Empire of Mali in the 14th century AD, had set out to find his people. He sailed over to these shores in search of his half-brother Abu Bakari. Mansa Musa sailed over to the shores of America in search of his half-brother, who was a Mandingo, a member of any various peoples inhabiting a large area of the upper Niger River Valley of West Africa. He too had become fed up with the slavery of his people by Arabs and their religion Islam like his brother. Abu Bakari, his half-brother, was emperor of Mali. He was the grandson of a daughter of Sandiata. Sandiata was the founder of the Malian Empire, and he ruled for 25 years. When Mansa Musa came into America, he brought in the name Ali and Sharufa. Then, the Sephardim brought in the names El and Al, and the French invasion brought in the name Bays and the Turkish name Days. When he arrived to the shores, he encountered a new people, the Edomites or the Zoo Aztecs, who were descendants from the Olmecs. These Edomites had mixed their seed with the original Mayans, who were of Hindu mixture, extraterrestrials from the planet Nirvana. From them sprung forth a civilization of prominent Indians of the Edomite descent. These are your original Mayans, and they were living in what's called Middle or Central America. The Mayans disregarded the Olmec traditions and kept to their Chinese traditions, so the Olmecs told them they are not having that. They made boats for them and sent them back across the next tides to the area of what is now called Vietnam, Phnom Penh, Guam and Malay, etc. When they got there were people already there that had mixed in with the Mali and the Chinese and the East Indian on this side. The Mayans mixed in and settled with these people. They set up vast civilizations. One of the most commonly known is Angkor in central plain of Cambodia, also called Kampuchea. They erected giant huge stones called Nagas, divine snakes and protective spirits of the Khmer Empire, which they got from the Hindus. The Nagas, also called the Nagini and Naga, were non-violent race of serpent reptilians who are benevolent towards humans. Some of these tribes migrated further into South America, and from there the descendants migrated towards North America and became known as Native Americans or American Indians. This name was given to these Edomite tribes by Christopher Columbus. These people inhabited various areas in North America. Another prominent migration of the Edomite tribes was from Northeast Asia, who came across the Bering Strait. They migrated from India up into Central Asia, up into Northeast and Central Asia across the Bering Strait. They moved down through Alaska and into North America. They became known as Edomites, a strand of Native Americans. All of these Indians that inhabited the Americas are from the branch of Mongolian stock. And although they may have mixed their seed with various tribes, which attributes to their varying facial features and body structures, they have various common factors. One very prominent common factor that these Indians have is their hair texture. Their hair is abundant, glossy and straight. What's noted is that they have what is called hollow hair, which means when you look at a cross-section of the strand of their hair under a microscope, you will see that it is in fact in a circular form, which is extraterrestrial, not 6 ether, 7 ether, 8 ether or 9 ether, but a texture in its own. This is almost synonymous to the fact that the Indians are able to put a hole through a very small bead and no one knows how it's done. This is one strain of your roots. Your history cannot be confined to Egypt alone. When Hagar the Egyptian was brought into the household by Abram, the upright servant of El Elo, there was no conflict between her and his wife Sarah or his way of life. Why didn't Sarah object to an Egyptian in her household, and how did they communicate if they were of different people, meaning speaking different languages? They were not the same language, but they looked alike, meaning that they were dark brown and both worshipped the same way, at the same time to the same one. In order for the prophet Abram to communicate with Hagar, she must have spoken a similar language, Ashuric Arabic and Chaldean or Aramaic Hebrew, the original languages of the planet Earth, and the language of the heavens that came down to the earth from the Anakai was written in the language cuneiform and the spoken language Nuwarpic. Ishmael, Abram's son, married an Egyptian woman whose name was Sadia Fatima because there was no difference between them. The same thing happened during the time of the Prophet Ahmed, son of Abdullah and Amina. When he migrated to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, the Negus there accepted the Ansars. The Prophet Ahmed, son of Abdullah and Amina and his followers, had no problem with the language when he went to the land of Cush. The Prophet Abram, son of Terah and Norna, went to sojourn in Egypt when there was a famine in his land, and he was welcome there. The Prophet Yitzhak, son of Yaqub, sent his family to Egypt to purchase grain, and his family was also greeted well. The Prophet Moses, son of Amram and Jochebed, grew up in Egypt, and there was called to prophethood. The children of Israel were in bondage under the Egyptians for 430 years, under the command of El Elo. As you can see, the recorded history of the children of Israel coincides with what is now being called Egyptian history. The history of the Nubian people is one in the same that cannot and should not be separated. How can we further prove that there was no difference between the Egyptians and Israel? For example, Jacob, son of Joseph, who had the ability to interpret dreams, was envied by his brothers because he was favored by his father. Thus his brothers conspired to slay him. But one of his brothers by the name of Judah had compassion and suggested that they sell him to Egypt by way of the Ishmaelites instead for 20 pieces of silver. Before we go any further, let's take a comparison and see what you see within these facts. Joseph and Jesus. Joseph had 11 brothers and 1 sister, making 12. Jesus had 12 disciples and 1 woman named Mary Magdalene. Spices were brought to Joseph while in Egypt. Spices were brought to Jesus by the wise men. Joseph flees from Potiphar's wife, and she snatches his cloak. Jesus flees in the Garden of Gethsemane, and they snatch his cloak. Joseph is sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus is sold for 30 pieces of silver. Judas suggests the selling of Joseph. Judas suggests the selling of Jesus. The background of Joseph was Egypt and the slaying of the firstborn. The prophet Joseph was an Egyptian official, and the children of Goshen in the area of the Nile Delta. The background of Jesus was Egypt and the slaying of the firstborn under Herod. See if you can see the similarity in these stories and decide which one is copied from the other. Now let us continue. So Joseph was thrown in a well, and the Midianite merchantmen who passed by drew him out and sold him unto Egypt. Joseph was bought by the Pharaoh Amenhotep and was appointed governor over Egypt by the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh had no problem accepting Joseph into his household because he did not offend or discredit the Egyptian deities. He didn't look different than the people of Egypt, and he spoke the same language as they did. While in Egypt, Joseph was referred to as Zaphnath-Paaneah, and he married the daughter of the high priest Asenath, who bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. The Egyptians and Israelites were one and the same people, with one and the same religious knowledge, not to be mistaken with the Hyksos dynasty that was ruling a small part of Egypt during the time, for these Hyksos were of Canaanite descent. There are examples of conversations, such as the Amalekites who dwelt with the Canaanites. The people of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, through his daughter Zipporah, converted to the Israelites' religion of Judah, so another religion would have definitely been mentioned. They would not have omitted an important point such as this. Another example of conversations which must be mentioned is the prophetess Ruth, a Moabite, who converted to the religion of Israel. She gleaned in the fields with the people. Ruth was a prophetess wife of Boaz, mother of Obed, of which David came, son of Jesse and Hilma. David was the 8th and younger son of Jesse the Ephraimite from Bethlehem. Boaz was the cousin of Elimelech. Elimelech was an Ephraimite who lived in Bethlehem of Judah. He was married to a beautiful Bethlehemite woman named Naomi, whose name means beauty. Naomi bore 2 sons to Elimelech, one named Mahlon, which means mild, and the other named Chilion, meaning pinning. When there was a famine in Israel, Elimelech and his family migrated to the country of Moab. There he was killed, which left Naomi with 2 sons and no husband. Mahlon married a beautiful Moabite woman named Ruth, whose name means a female friend. Chilion also married a beautiful Moabite woman whose name was Orpah, and the name Orpah means freshness. About 10 years after Naomi's sons were married, before any of them bore any children to their wives, they were both killed in Moab, and once again this left Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law alone with children. Soon after the death of her sons, Naomi heard that El-Yahuwah had blessed his children in the land of Judah by giving them a good harvest, so she decided to return home. On the way to the land of Judah, Naomi turned to her 2 widowed daughters-in-law and told them to go back to the land of Moab to their mother's house, which was the tradition of widowed women. She told them that El-Yahuwah would make it possible for them to marry again. Ruth refused to leave Naomi, and she said she would go wherever Naomi went. So Ruth and her mother-in-law went to Bethlehem. It was the beginning of the harvest season in Bethlehem, and Naomi told Ruth to work under Boaz, who was a cousin to her father-in-law Elimelech. Ruth did so much, and in time they were married. Ruth bore a son to Boaz, whose name was Obed. Naomi was finally happy because she had a grandson in the place of her sons. Obed was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David, and from this family came Yeshua. Orpah took Naomi's advice and kissed her mother-in-law goodbye and returned to the land of Moab. When she arrived in Moab, she was taken by force by an Anakai giant named Mahmud, and the name Mahmud means thankful. He took Orpah to the city of Gath, which was where the city of the Anakai took refuge in, and there Orpah bore Mahmud 4 sons that were giants. Their names were Saph, meaning threshold, who was killed by a Hushite named Zebekai. Ishi-Benob, meaning my dwelling place is in Nob, who was killed by Abishai, the son of Zeruiah. Phaaf, meaning obligatory, who is described as being a man of great stature, having 6 fingers on each hand, and on each foot 6 toes. He was killed by Jonathan, the son of Shimei, a brother of David. Goliath means soothsayer, which is derived from the root word Gala, which means to denude. Goliath was the son of Mahmud, and was killed in the Philistine war with the Israelites at Gob by Elkanah, the son of Jair. Origim the Bethlehemite. What most people are not aware of is that there were two men named Goliath who were from the offspring of Orpha. One was Goliath, her son by Mahmud, and the other was Goliath, her grandson, who is called Goliath ben Goliath. It was not David who killed Goliath, son of Mahmud the Anakite. It was a Bethlehemite named Elkanah. The name Elkanah in Aramaic Hebrew means El is grace. Goliath, son of Mahmud the Anakai, married a woman named Firkin, which means mathematician. He and his son Lahmi were both killed in the Philistine war against the Israelites by Elkanah. Goliath ben Goliath was the son of a Gitti named Goliath from the land of Gath. All the inhabitants of Gath were called Gitti. This Goliath was killed by David. He was 7 foot tall and wore a helmet of bronze, a coat of armor that weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze, and a javelin of bronze on his shoulder, and had a huge jaw, which was graced with a double row of sharp teeth, and 6 toes on each foot. Every day for 40 days, Goliath ben Goliath challenged the Israelites to a battle. He told the Israelites to pick one of their men to fight him, and that if the Israelite kills him, then the Philistine would be slaves to the Israelites. However, if he killed an Israelite, then the Israelites would be slaves to the Philistines. All of the Israelites were afraid and ran away. When the ruler Saul heard the news, he was terrified, so he promised to give a reward to whoever would kill Goliath ben Goliath. The reward that the ruler offered was his daughter's hand in marriage, and for the brave man's family to be exempt from taxes. One day, Jesse, son of Obed, gave his son David some food to take up to his 3 oldest brothers, who had followed the ruler Saul to war with the Philistines. The 3 sons who went to war were Eliab, Anadab, and Shamash. The food David took to his brothers consisted of half a bushel of roasted grain, 10 loaves of bread, and cheese for the commanding officer. David left the food at the camp at the valley of Elah, where the Israelite forces were stationed, and rushed to the battlefield to see how his brothers were doing. Just as David got there, Goliath ben Goliath came out and challenged the Israelites again. David could not have faith from the cowardliness that the Israelite soldiers had displayed, so he ran to the ruler Saul and told him he wanted to fight Goliath ben Goliath. David said to the ruler, "No one should be afraid of a Philistine." Even though David was just 19 years old, he showed signs of a warrior. David insisted to Saul to let him go and fight Goliath ben Goliath. Finally, the ruler allowed him to go. The ruler Saul gave David his own armor and told him to go. He told David that El-Yahuwah would be with him. As David approached Goliath ben Goliath, he said, "This day El-Yahuwah will put you in my power. I will defeat you and cut off your head." Then David reached to his bag of pebbles and pulled out a stone and put it in his slingshot and slung it at Goliath ben Goliath. The pebble hit Goliath ben Goliath in his forehead and cracked his skull. David went over to the dead Goliath and used his sword to chop off his head. When David took the head of Goliath ben Goliath to Jerusalem to the ruler Saul, everyone in Israel and Judah loved him because he was such a successful leader and brave warrior. This consequently led to David's persecution by Saul, father of Jonathan, of whom David had an intimate relationship with, which led to his crucifixion by Saul with the help of his own son Absalom, who plotted to have David killed by the Philistine. Although the name David means beloved, the truth about it is that David was a very miserable, wretched man who was despised by many. During the spring season, which was the time the rulers went out to battle, while David was in Jerusalem, Joab and his army invaded the land of Ammon and overthrew the city of Rabbah.